Hello, everyone, and welcome to Creating Conditions for Social Mobility. I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Hope everyone's had a great morning thus far, and we don't break that streak. My name is Joshua Sledge. I am a director at the Center for Financial Services Innovation. We're a national organization with the mission of improving the financial health of American households. And I've got a great panel here today to discuss the issues around social mobility. But to start, first of all, what do we mean when we use that term, social mobility? Well, largely it's about opportunity and access to opportunity. The type of opportunities for you to climb up the economic ladder, to deepen your stability, to pursue whatever aspirations are most important to you. When I think about social mobility, I think it's about children who are born into poverty, not destined to stay there, and adults who are determined to improve their circumstances, having the tools and the opportunities to do so. So this is ultimately the American dream. Not only is it about individual aspiration, but it's also a signal of a very healthy and inclusive economy and overall good for our country. But we know that people's ability and likelihood to move up and down the economic ladder, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. The environment that we create, the opportunities that are available, the policy environment, the tools that people have access to all contribute to that. And so today what we're going to discuss is where we see some opportunities for both public and private solutions to emerge to help create the conditions again for social mobility. So I'm going to turn to my panel now and give them all an opportunity to introduce themselves with an opening question. So Zach, we'll start with you. I'd like you to introduce yourself and your organization and where you see opportunities to promote social mobility in the work that you do.
Sure. Well, my name is Zach Williams. I'm the Director of Business Development at Condé Nast. I'm passionate about financial literacy and financial literacy education. I've taught financial literacy education at San Quentin Prison. And for me, my focus, especially in what I do in the day-to-day, relates to media and media innovation. And I see there's a lot of opportunity relating to empowering social mobility in media. The way in which the current environment, especially with digital media, is structured is very much based around optimizing advertising and generating revenue based upon eyeballs. So the structure of content is very much focused on selling ads. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can be addressed, but beyond that, there's some systemic issues that need to be addressed relating to creating a more robust way in which people can feel bought in and opted into kind of a more socially forward media environment. So that's that.
Fantastic. Thank you. Richard?
Well, good morning, everybody. I have a lot of titles to figure out how to make this simple. So my day job is working for a essentially philanthropic enterprise called NextGen Crowdfunding, which is an education platform to help small business owners understand how crowdfunding can be used to sort of mobilize assets from the community to build small micro enterprises. And we're technically not a not-for-profit company, but we sure behave like when we have 35 employees and no revenue, so I think that would qualify as a not-for-profit. I'm also a recovering academic. I keep having relapses. I used to be at UC Berkeley Institute for Business and Social Impact, looking at the effect of technological change and platform economies and how that affects society. I'm currently a fellow at the Institute for Money, Technology, and Financial Inclusion, and we're at UC Irvine. I moved down to Orange County, and our center is the Global Research Center on the softer side of FinTech, how money is used and how anthropologists and sociologists and linguists and economists and political scientists are gathering to sort of study the impact of FinTech globally, and we've worked with people from 83 countries, mostly in the global south, to help mobilize access to economic opportunity, basically Africa and Asia. And we're now attending, my particular role is to look at community banking, credit unions, and access to capital in underserved communities here in the US. So I'm sort of the domestic guy. I also advise the Bill Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, and lots of other foundations around platform economics. And I'm also going to channel my good friend Kim Wales, whose plane got delayed today. She can't join us. Kim and I are very active in the crowdfunding movement. She's a mentor to African-American female business owners in New York City when she's not on Wall Street. So she basically walks the walk, and she's an amazingly passionate individual. So I'm also here to talk about how these new rules about crowdfunding and access to capital, there's been a lot of regulatory changes that unfortunately have not penetrated minority communities very well. And there are tools available to you to raise money that's anti-dilutive, that also can help you grow your business quickly. So I'm happy to answer some questions around that.
Fantastic. Yeah, the entrepreneurship piece I think will be key to the conversation. And last but certainly not least, Chuck.
Hey, thank you. Welcome. My name's Chuck Harris. I run a company in Austin, Texas, called NetSpend. We are about a 15-year-old company. Our purpose really, we started out typical startup. I'm sorry.
I think your mic was on.
All right. Sort of a typical startup about 15 years ago. And like most startups, we kind of rattled around with our business model. We discovered that there's between 60 and 70 million Americans. Can you guys hear me? I don't.
It keeps going in.
Keeps going out. Pardon me? Oh, that's going to be awkward. I'm the. Anyway, I'll try to speak loud so you can hear me.
Looks like they got a new mic for you here.
Okay. Oh wow. And so we were like a typical start. We were initially focused on college students shopping on the internet, that sort of thing, and we discovered that there are between 60 and 70 million Americans who either can't get or don't want a bank account. They've had either a personal experience or life experience that's led them outside the mainstream financial system. And at that point, the company really found its mission. And for the last 10 or 12 years, we've been dedicated to building a tier 1 financial product for those consumers. And we've recently expanded into sort of small business, and we'll get, I think, a bit more into the sort of the entrepreneurship. But the mission of the company is really to provide a financial alternative. So think about a bank account on a debit card and a mobile app and a browser that will allow you to access most, if not all, the services you could otherwise get at a bank. And so our first 10 or 12 years have been about access and choice and providing an alternative to consumers. And I think really, we'll get into a little bit more, but our journey has brought us to a point where, last year we launched a foundation, and we're really committed to how do we, through our years of banking this consumer, how do we provide access for growth, income growth, and we really landed on two things. It's self-employment and higher employment, and I think we'll obviously get more into that as we talk today. So great to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you. So we've got a wealth of experience, and I think that's going to lead us to a pretty robust conversation. And Chuck, I actually want to send the first question your way because it touches on what you just mentioned. As we think about social and economic mobility, usually the first thing we think of is income, right? We usually phrase it in people at a certain quintile, what's their likelihood and ability to progress to another.
Right.
So as we think about the question of income, particularly at this moment where the nature of work is changing and projections toward people being shifted toward the 1099 economy and doing more contract labor, more toward a service economy. Where do you see things going, and do you think that opportunities for income growth, do you see challenges there? Do you see opportunities on the horizon?
Well, I think all the above. I think there's tremendous opportunity. We have about 5 million customers today, so we see in just our own customer base. So I can speak, I think, pretty well about what I observe in my business. Probably less. You probably have more research to support that, but we see 160% kind of growth in loads onto our product that are coming from one of the gig economy employers, whether it's Fasten or Uber or wherever it might be. So it is clearly represented in our data, and so we really try to think about how do we start building products for it. And I think our as I said earlier, our mission really is this notion of sort of entrepreneurship or the gig economy or secondary sources of income has been around forever. For our customer, we've observed it from the beginning where over half our customers are on direct deposit, but we'll see secondary loads coming into our account. So we know there's income sources, maybe not consistently through the year, but at different times of the year where our customers are working to improve their financial lives. And that's ultimately what led us to our decision, looking at our own data, interacting with our own customers. We close our company once a year. We send everybody out in the field. We spend a day in the life of our customer because it's important for us to stay attached. We canceled our company picnic. We canceled our Christmas party. We spend our day doing that. And what that interaction and all the other things we do of the year, whether they're focus groups as we build products and build solutions, our customers have a great desire and passion and an ability to do more. And so what we've decided to do as a company is like, how do we enable that more? So first 10 years access, and now through our foundation, we're investing in scholarships and entrepreneurship. It's like, how do we help raise the income level? But a lot of that is coming through what we see, I think, in the gig economy, but it has always been happening. It's a side gig or a side hustle, something that's happening on the side where people are creating sources of secondary income.
Richard or Zach, any thoughts on prospects for income growth?
For me?
Either.
Zach, you go.
Yeah, I think we've got a perception problem in the U.S. We've got this kind of mindset of, getting rich versus generating wealth, and the media plays a role in perpetuating that, and that we kind of content is created around these exceptional people who are creating these amazing things and getting rich from it, and I think that's okay, but with that, there's not a narrative of the hard work that goes into saving, generating, small wins, and creating, a base from which to grow from, and the celebrity culture that's been created in, within mass media, and the idea that people can get rich overnight, I think creates this idea, this notion of, people attempting or endeavoring to kind of have that one-hit wonder or work towards something that will just generate, this massive windfall. And that, I think, is problematic because the mindset towards actually building wealth relates to saving and creating, a base from which to grow off of. And I think, that's challenging because of the culture that mass media has proliferated.
Zach, I'm going to follow up on that. In your opinion, what does a media environment look like that does a better job of promoting those types of concepts and really giving people a more accurate picture of what social mobility looks like?
Well, I think there needs to be more coverage around the stories of people who are doing great things within their community. There's not, mass media is exactly that. It's covering kind of the whole, states. There's not stories often about what's going on in local communities, identifying role models and what they've done, sharing their stories. So that's challenging, and that's in part because of the reduction of kind of local news as a thing. I mean, you can still get it on the TV, but you're not going to a website and most people are not going to websites getting their local news, et cetera. So I think leaders within a community are not generally identified and covered in a meaningful way within kind of the digital media environment. So that would be good to cover. Also, just sharing narratives around taking a pragmatic approach towards generating wealth and identifying success, as opposed to covering stories, the sensational stories around athletes or celebrities making all this money. It's inaccessible for a lot of people, and so we've created this environment of kind of rewarding exceptionalism, but not people who are doing the real work, the hard work, and stacking up small wins that ultimately lead to something great. Mm-hmm. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's shift gears a little bit here. Richard, you've got a good background and I think expertise in the area of small business, particularly as it relates to access to capital, these type of opportunities for people to take what they've got and maybe in a pursuit of that journey toward moving from point A to point B, having an opportunity and really seeing a small business or some kind of enterprise of their own being a way to move along the economic ladder, to build wealth. I'd love to hear your thoughts on just the state of play right now, particularly as it relates to some of the more innovative new opportunities for access to capital. Are those reaching the communities that really need them? Would love to hear how you're viewing the environment.
Yeah, happy to. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the bad news, and then we'll get to the good news. So we are now in the 33rd year of the percentage of bank assets being used to loan to small businesses in a straight decline. This is not a new trend. This is year 33 in a row that banks are decreasing the amount of small business lending that they're doing. And unfortunately, that's even more magnified given the banking deserts that we see in a lot of communities, that even where there are banks, oftentimes they're not lending to small businesses. And there's also been a shift in the SBA loans. And what's happening is the SBA is sort of becoming Fannie Mae. They're becoming the lender of last resort for a lot of small business lending. And to put that in context, in the entire history of that loan program, they never actually loaned all the money out until 2 years ago. And then 2 years ago, they ran out of money in 6 months and had to go get an emergency appropriation from Congress to restock the amount of loan. In 2016, they ran out of money in 90 days, which says there's a massive amount of demand for small business owners for those government-backed small business loans at unprecedented levels. Now, the problem, and I'll be very frank, I'm not a really big fan of Trump, is that the current administration has plans to dramatically decrease the budget of the SBA, and they've announced their intentions to basically defund all the minority business development centers, all the economic development agencies. They intend to basically gut most of that service provision layer from the small business community. I'm hoping Congress doesn't put that into the actual budget, but that is what the president has asked for. So it's going to be a dramatic impact on a lot of smaller communities. Now, the good news is there are some new vehicles out there that I don't, unfortunately, think most small business communities are aware of that can raise money. So obviously you have the peer lending, marketplace lending, the Prosper's, the Lending Club, the OnDeck, although OnDeck I would be careful about. There's hundreds of these peer-to-peer lending platforms that loan money to small businesses. Many times they are capable of creating either really complex but interesting models to do revenue-based finance, to use other sources of data, basically your e-commerce transactions, your social network. Like, we found that one of the best predictors of creditworthiness is your first 5-degree connections. And they're basically, people tend to socially connect with people at the same FICO score, which is sort of an interesting finding. That people tend to cluster not just by political views or religious views, but also by creditworthiness and income. So we can actually use a lot of this interesting data to make better scoring and predictive models for small business lending. So fintech is actually allowing companies to lend to small business owners that historically have not been able to access capital. So there's an increase in improvement there. Now, the danger of being an academic, I have to argue both sides of that, is sometimes the APRs are really high. And if those folks don't have very high levels of financial literacy and understanding of the loan product and the terms and the fees and how the loan product is structured, they can find themselves in a really bad situation. And I've talked to some CFDIs that are coming in and saying that we're getting a lot of need from small business owners that took out these loans not understanding what they were doing. So the whole financial education and literacy, in my mind, is an absolute prerequisite before they access the fintech space. Now, in terms of an opportunity, there's this new, 5 years old now, crowdfunding. One of the least understood and least used in the African American community, and I'm a good friend of Rodney Sampson here in Atlanta, who runs Tech Square Labs, and he mentors and trains entrepreneurs here in Atlanta on how to use these new tools. So if any of you are local, look up Rodney. He's an amazing resource. But what we found is in the African American community specifically, there's almost no participation at all on any of these platforms. And we're talking about platforms doing tens of billions of transactions a year. We're seeing, and there's, for another community, Latinos, there are no Spanish-speaking websites. There's no information available in Spanish, let alone Spanish native websites. So the community has not done a good job of reaching out to minority business owners, nor are they providing services in a language that would work for the Latinos. Now, the good news is you can raise up to $1 million. Actually, last week Congress changed it. I mean, the SEC changed it. $1,070,000. Don't ask me why they had to make it more complicated. So any American can now invest roughly $2,200 into any small business that's using what's called regulation crowdfunding. And what we're finding is 50% of the entrepreneurs who are trying to use these are coming from ICIC identified underserved areas, which is really shocking to us that there's that much demand in the inner city, and 40% of them have been successful at raising capital. So if any of you know how hard it is to get an angel investor or a venture capitalist to give you money, a 40% success rate is shocking. It's typically like 1 in 200, put that in perspective. So what this is mobilizing is access to investment capital for early stage companies that are trying to grow, and that capital seems to be flowing into a couple types of businesses. Ironically, it's the local food movement. The whole eat local, buy local, know where your food is sourced from. That movement has taken this crowdfunding and basically married them together. So companies that have local food, organic food production, craft food, distilleries as well as breweries, anything in the food and beverage space, those companies are killing it. They're doing incredibly well, including from underserved areas, using these tools to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars in a matter of weeks. And the cost is about 10% total cost of capital. And it's important to understand that the difference here is typically if you're a small business owner and you go to an investor, they set the terms, and oftentimes we call them vulture capitalists. They're very predatory, and sometimes they set it up that your business will fail and they'll take your IP if you fail. In this case, as a small business owner, you can dictate the terms. You literally can write what you're willing to give away, and you can even do notes that are called safe notes. And a safe note says, invest in me, but I don't owe you anything unless I have a successful exit event, and then you get X percentage of my company. So the investor aligns their interests with your success, but if you fail, you don't have any debt, you have no consequences to you. So it's really almost like a social impact investment into these small business owners that people are willing to bet on their success, if you will, or invest in their success, but there's no debt, there's no obligation, there's nothing on the part of the investor. So we can go into a lot of details, but there are some of these vehicles that are out there. But I spoke at a gathering of 800 African American business owners recently. 2 out of the 800 were aware of the rules, and none of them knew anyone who had used them. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of information on how to use these tools. I'm happy to provide some resources, but what we're finding is it's basically upending the whole race bias and gender bias of traditional investors. And women are actually 16% more likely than males to be successful in crowdfunding, including minority women. So it seems like this is the opposite of bias. It's people who are going to crowdfunding to back passionate entrepreneurs who they align with and want to support, including minority women. So I'll stop there and keep going.
Yeah, no, that is a fascinating. Thank you for that overview. It seems like there's this opportunity for entrepreneurs to tap into some of these sources of capital in ways that can really help them get from point A to point B. I think something that really resonated with me that you mentioned is one, even awareness of these types of opportunities is lacking, but also instances in which even though people may get capital, are they successful? Do they have a good sense of how to manage that? I think both of those things really speak to broader financial literacy, financial capability, really understanding what it takes, what decisions need to be made to kind of get from point A to point B. And I think that's something that's constant not only for small business owners, but also for individuals at large, just trying to build assets, trying to increase their income. Chuck and Zach, I know that you both have, I think, especially as it relates to individual households, people that may be trying to build wealth on their own, have had some interesting work in both spaces. I'd love to hear your thoughts around the ability for financial literacy and providing some of those basic tools. Do we have what we need to help people to move up the economic ladder?
Yeah, that's great. We see a lot of that in our own as we were bringing in our entrepreneurs who were looking to gain access to capital. What we sort of observed is there's absolutely no shortage of ideas or energy or passion. So the nucleus is there, which is really exciting. And I think the things that we need to work on, I think what the opportunity is how do we provide, and I'll use a very broad term, some level of mentorship. Like we were looking at examples where when an individual did get access to capital, they signed a really bad contract. They had an exclusive agreement to buy X amount of tile over X amount of period of time. They had no revenue. You're like, man, why did a simple act like that? And so I think access to sort of mentors, again, in the broadest sense, whether it's people from the community, people who've done before, and in our case, we actually think companies, the private sector, has a really important role to play here. I mean, we look at it as a company. We have about 600 employees. And part of our mission as a company is we allow our employees to interact with these entrepreneurs, and we're just now getting this stood up, to provide some level of coaching, not to do it for them or anything, but we have lawyers and people who can help and provide some input. That is a huge part of it. As I said, the nucleus is there, and then just education about the capital and how to deploy it and get access to these alternative. And to me, it is exciting as a business owner because these are all very non-traditional ways. So these are institutions that aren't mired in, here's how we've done it for 20 or 30 years, and we'll just pick on the banks for a minute. They are creating a new, so they're looking at the market, they're looking at the opportunity, they're looking at different ways to distribute, different ways to interact with consumers and businesses. And so they aren't constrained by a legacy of, I've got a branch network, so my model is I got to leverage and monetize my branch network. So they're not going to, they build businesses to support that. And I'm sorry, if you have a $100 average balance in your account, you're not going to be very valuable to someone trying to monetize a branch network. And so it's just math. So I think the exciting thing is the emergence of the digital platforms, the access that kind of flattens the world a bit. And as our job, and what I think other companies should be considering, is how do we empower our employees to interact and contribute to this? Because I think if you look at where the brains and the energy and the passion, you might argue they're in these new companies that are out in the market. That I got a news flash for you, Mr. Anybody trying to help this consumer might have good intention. That's a new thought, right? You might actually have companies that have a desire to help people start a business and be successful in a business. And I think igniting that in the private sector is important to fill that gap.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Zach, I'd love for you to share a little bit of your experience working with the prison population, helping people to understand opportunities, especially as they're getting ready for reentry, to help set them on the right course. And what type of information or guidance did you find to be useful or helpful, in particular with a really a challenging population? Where did you see success, and what type of tools or information did you find to be most helpful in driving it?
Well, I mean, kind of the core insight from starting to, from my time spent teaching, relates to kind of people's emotional relationship with money and finances. It's, people get very passionate and tense when it relates to spending money, and it's a form of kind of, it's self-medicating when people spend in a way, and so that in itself is challenging. You have to shift the mindset from
we heard it clearly.
Yeah. From being emotional to being pragmatic about money and finances. And we found, and this is I volunteered teaching in supporting an inmate, a prisoner named Curtis Carroll, who started the program, and we found that the younger a person, especially if they're kind of under 25, if you impact them at that age and can really inspire them to be responsible about saving, you would get more results than kind of people who are older who might have a tougher time in terms of changing their habits and ways. Now I'm not, the positive thing is that when you build people's confidence in saving and start, rewarding saving activity, people get really into it. But it's about shifting that mindset from spending to saving. I think in consumer culture, people very much kind of attribute their sense of self-worth to what they're wearing, how they're spending money, things like that. And really, it's about kind of reestablishing a sense of self-confidence and self-worth based upon saving. So, a couple things. One is shifting mindset from emotional to practical, reaching populations, people at an earlier age. Ideally, kind of target age is like 12 to 14. There's not adequate financial literacy education resources in the schools. That's a major issue. And then the third thing is kind of really starting incentivizing people to save, both through kind of incentive programs that, within San Quentin Prison, there's an incentive program created around giving people simple things like noodle packets and chips, but that's a currency in prison, and so people were actually responding well to saving and building up their accounts based upon getting these small rewards. But those in themselves, just a reward, just something to show that people are listening, is important. That people are responding to positive behavior. That's reinforcing. There's actual people. When you're given something or rewarded, people actually have a dopaminergic response to that. And so you got to kind of reward those positive behaviors over time. So I think those are kind of three main insights from my time teaching at San Quentin.
Yeah, that's interesting. Especially that last point really makes me think that there are some opportunities for, and I'd be curious for the panel if you guys have any thoughts on whether or not you see this, but in the financial services industry, are providers really positioning themselves as being supportive of those broader aspirations and goals? Are you understanding what people are looking to accomplish and building a product that makes it very clear how you're going to help them to accomplish that, and rewarding people as they move along that space? Curious, how would you rate, Chuck, how the industry is doing today?
I think the industry is I would say it's spotty. You have sort of legacy sort of businesses that have whatever their motivations are, and then you have kind of new upstart businesses that I think are subject to sort of the broader trends. If you think about just sitting back and looking at what's happening, is we have a sort of a country that at one point in time everything was controlled sort of centrally. You got your news from the news, you went to your bank to get your bank, you shopped in the Sears catalog, and there's been this massive shift because of mobile and the internet and other things where consumers now construct their own news system, they construct their own shopping, they shop on Amazon, they do, they might shop, on various internet sites, and financial products are the same, and I think those companies have to be responsive to what the consumer demand is. So I think they're out building, trying to figure it out, trying to kind of decode the new consumer mindset because they don't have a big franchise to support them. They have to do it, and they're trying to figure it out. And so I think it's a exciting time to be in it. I think there's sort of the government and regulations are really trying to figure out how to cope with that transition, and it's everything from, you saw net neutrality news kind of floating through DC this week and some other things, but there is a bit of upheaval, at least in the financial sector, as this kind of new way of doing business finds its roots. But I will tell you, the companies I run across, certainly our company, we are essentially focused on the customer experience and helping, like as I said earlier we were kind of organizing your finances, and we've discovered we have to do more. And so that comes with building products. We've built new debit cards that you can get your income from your secondary job and segregate it for tax purposes and make it so we're trying to innovate and create products that help people that have other sources of income and support their business. I think you have to do that. I think there's no turning back. There's not going to be one place that, the consumer has been unleashed in the market, and you have to respond, or you're going to get left behind, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So shifting gears a bit, home ownership, right? When we think about social mobility, we think about progressing, particularly from an asset and wealth building perspective. For the longest time, owning a home has really been seen as a vehicle, a good way to do that. We're less than a decade or so removed from the financial crisis, where a lot of people lost wealth with the downturn of the marketplace. Curious on the panel's thoughts on home ownership as a renewed source of asset and wealth accumulation and wealth building, of social mobility. How is it right today, and how can we continue to improve that opportunity, make it more accessible to people, and give them the tools really around resilience to withstand those kind of shocks, so that it doesn't knock them off the wealth building journey?
I don't know. I've lost money on every house I've owned, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask. I don't know. It's hard for me. As I travel around the world, I think the U.S. is unique in this sort of sense of home ownership. And I guess I absolutely recognize the security, and there's like an emotional attachment to it. And maybe, this is sort of in the world of nail, a hammer, everything looks like a nail kind of thing for me. But I see so much potential gain for investment in self-employment and higher employment that if that resource and that capital could be deployed to pursue that with the same sort of energy, I look at, hey, I don't know how you double your household income by owning a house, but I know how you can double your household income by starting your own business.
Well, I actually have to agree. And my answer is I'm going to pick on my wife. She's a scientist and an engineer and an MBA. So to say that she's a quant is she had a spreadsheet for our marriage planning, okay? Literally. So if you want to geek and you want to get married, call my wife. She can tell you how to do it. So she's the ultimate quant, and we've spent a lot of time looking at home ownership, and we actually have decided it's probably not in our economic interest. And so we're sort of counter to the trend right now. And the reason for that is economic mobility sometimes requires physical mobility, the ability to move jobs and move opportunities. And oftentimes when you're into a house, you have so much fixed costs and the ability, just the closing costs, you all know what I'm talking about. For many people that are younger especially, it's probably not in their economic interest to tie themselves down to a piece of property. And so we're probably contrarians here, but I don't think that home ownership is actually a great model. And yes, I've lost money in a lot of houses too. And the empirical research shows that home ownership in America typically underperforms the S&P as an asset class. So there are people that do well, but in general, home ownership is not a great place to think of it as an investment. There are, the psychological maturity, and my in-laws have lived in the same house for 45 years, and there's a lot of emotional and cultural and social reasons to want to own a piece of property. From a strict financial returns point of view, it's probably not a great investment.
Yeah, I mean, I share your guys' sentiment.
We're not going to be invited back, just so you guys know.
Yeah.
I think, in this day and age, especially if it relates to kind of, receiving financing to buy a home, there's a lot of the vehicles out there are not in the best interest of the consumer. I mean, option arms contracts, these things ratchet up to unreasonable APRs over a very short amount of time. And so, compounded with that is the idea that, it's not a sure, like building home equity is not a surefire thing. It's you might buy a home, put a down payment on a home, start engage in a mortgage, and you might not be building, value. So I can't say that home ownership is kind of, I think given this current environment, should be considered kind of, something to check the box of success. It's different than it was 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Thoughts on, especially if you're shifting and thinking about other ways that people can build wealth. Where do you think, say I'm a 30-year-old, making a decent living, I'm starting to think about saving and really accumulating assets. Where should I put my money? Where should I start to invest? Outside of Chuck, I think your idea of in yourself, right? How should I save? How should I build wealth?
Well, I'm on the record. I think I could give you just our story. I was amazed when we did our first round of scholarships at what we received. I thought it's classic startups that when you start something new, you don't know what to expect. You could study it forever and see, well, how many people are going to, we didn't know if anybody would even respond or believe us that we're actually willing to invest in you because we get so much spam and so forth. But what showed up when we sent our first set of applications out it was amazing. It wasn't always, there were people wanting the 4-year degrees, but it was stories of, I've exhausted all of my Pell Grant or my grant money, and I'm X hours away from something. But we looked at people who wanted commercial driver's licenses and phlebotomists, and compounding, and there's all of this that was foreign to us. I went to a 4-year school and that sort of thing, and so I think you have to be open to those sorts of things. And in each one of those cases, say, if I invest $4,500 into this class, I literally could double my income for that household for $4,500 investment. Where my buddy has a commercial driver's license, I can go from working in the warehouse to driving the truck and making that kind of money. And so I look at that, and that was not an edge case. I looked at hundreds and hundreds of applications. And it's this kind of threshold thing. Is people just need a little help, a little, I can move up, I can become a phlebotomist, draw blood, I can have a 20 or 30% increase in my income. And so that is what captured us. When we looked at that and saw and discovered, frankly, there were things, I didn't even know what a phlebotomist was. You know, I was like figuring it out as well. And so I think there's non-traditional, if that's what you want to call it, and they're not necessarily trade schools, but there's hundreds and hundreds of different ways to do that. But the most powerful one we observe is in the self-employment side. We had a person in town that had started a soul food restaurant. And what drove us to our conclusion was all of this research, but we met this person. What I was most impressed by was this person had started a business, and the impact was just not hers. The impact was her peer group. So she now employs 6 or 7 people. She feeds homeless people on the weekend. Her daughter works there, right? And so this one small business that has elevated the income has impacted a much broader group and impacted them as well. So I think that's the area of interest, and that I think we should be focusing policy on and corporate giving on and all of those sorts of things. The impact level is so enormous. And I don't think it's obvious to CEOs of companies that's out there. And I think that's where the education needs to take place, personally.
Let me echo that, and if I'm on here. So one asset class you may not be aware of you can invest in is investing in these peer loans. And my wife and I took all of our money out of CDs, all of our money out of money market accounts, all of our money out of savings, and we dumped them all into these accounts. So this is something I actually do, not just talk about. And we're averaging 9.2% a year net of all expenses and defaults. So we're also getting 9% on cash. And this is as an average consumer. I mean, there's some really interesting vehicles you can get if you're bringing in hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you can invest as little as $25 in these companies. So what we do is we just continually invest in hundreds of small businesses, and we have thousands of these loans out right now. And we literally will only put $25 or $50 behind any individual small business owner. And what we're finding is, even with the default rate, we're still getting 9%. So talk about if you could get 9% on your cash as opposed to 0.75 or whatever the bank is giving you. The problem is you have to be able to lock that money up for a couple of years. It's not instantly accessible. But if you can take $500 or $1,000 and put it into this asset class, you can do really well. Now, obviously that's our personal experience, but the typical is around 7 or 8% returns. So that is one vehicle most people have no idea exists and that they can invest in. I also, even though I'm a professor, I think the vast majority of my students have no business being in college because they don't know why they're there. They don't know what jobs they intend to get. They don't know what those jobs are going to pay. And they believe because mommy and daddy told them they need to go to college, they should go to college. And I think many of my students are too young and too immature to benefit from college. So I'm actually a really big proponent of kids doing a transitional year or getting a trade or doing something other than going straight into a 4-year degree to get some practical life experience, some maturity, and or a trade. I think it's great to have some concrete skills other than a degree in political science. Sorry for the political science majors, but not a very practical degree. So a couple of examples I taught years ago at the University of Utah, which is, like Ohio State, mid-level, not Harvard. 70% of the students who start that school 7 years later still don't have a degree. Only 30% will get a bachelor's degree within 7 years, not 4 years, which means 70% have between 0 and 7 years of debt and no degree to back it up with. So I'm a really big fan of students being employed and working part-time. That being said, I passionately hate most of the for-profit colleges. I think the majority of them under-deliver and overcharge. So I like community colleges, I like JCs, I like local institutions. So again, my bias is self-employment and trade as opposed to startups. And in the startup and finance world, we have this denigrative term called a lifestyle business, which means we were not going to invest in you because you're never going to scale to the $100 million, fast-growing tech business. Well, that really is the lifeblood of most American jobs. In fact, small businesses have created all net new jobs in America in the last 50 years. The Fortune 500 is a net job destroyer in America. So in our communities, to your example, self-employment is a huge thing, but my concern is two factors. Most of the entrepreneurial educational materials in the US are written at a 14th grade level, meaning college professors like me write it for our undergraduate students. The average American reads at a 7th grade level. Average American. So there's a huge disconnect between how we train and think about entrepreneurship and the actual skills needed to create small businesses and micro enterprises. And I actually have a book, if anybody has a foundation, which I'll give you for free, I'm not charging, where we took the Kauffman Foundation programs on entrepreneurial training and we wrote it at a 7th grade level. So we have the material, and I'm happy to give it to anybody for free if you'll use it. So with that, I'll turn it to somebody else.
Yeah, so I'm going to just take a practical approach. I mean, if you're 30 years old and you haven't figured out what you love doing, spending your time doing, figure out what it is. That's actually really important. And I think another issue we've got is that, in the past, especially 2 decades, specifically in the past decade, we've developed a culture around lionizing entrepreneurship. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a very good thing. But based upon my experience, not everyone is geared to be an entrepreneur. So if you're 30, younger, older, if you find out what you love or at least can tolerate, developing a trade, a serious skill set and expertise is something that a lot of the prisoners I've worked with have found really helpful as they go through the reentry process. And these people are, finding good, well-paying jobs that will enable them over time to, buy a home, put a down payment on a home, buy a home, should they want to, start a family, and make real money doing it. So I think that's important. Developing kind of the mindset of generating wealth is extraordinarily important. I can't tell you how many of the prisoners I've worked with, black, white, Latino, across the board, who think that actually making money is for rich white people. It's an issue. And I just, it breaks my heart to see that because there's a confidence problem. And I think, building confidence, knowing that people are valuable and generating a sense of self-worth is extraordinarily important at any age. And these people that, I've worked with, they're really smart, and they might have been dealt with early family trauma or been at the wrong place at the wrong time, or might have done bad things. But at the end of the day, they're putting the time into, investing in themselves, and there's no better time to invest in oneself than now. And so I think, just knowing that if it's not entrepreneurship, if starting a business is not what one aspires to do, it's okay to learn trades and build skills. There's no better time to do it than now. So that's my practical approach.
Yeah. And Zach, I'm really happy too that you called that out, that cultural element of really understanding and that mindset shift of being able to see yourself as progressing, as moving up on the ladder, and seeing yourself as capable to do it is not to be understated. So I'm really happy you mentioned that. I'm going to turn it to the audience. Are we
10 minutes.
done? Can we take questions? Do we have time to take a couple questions from the audience? Yeah. I'm going to do that, and if I'm not supposed to, they'll yank me off the stage. So right up here, up front, sir.
Yes, this question is for the recovering academic. You said you were in a room of 800 entrepreneurs, and only 3 of them knew about the crowdfunding opportunities. That's a marketing trick. And so, speaking to the mindset of the people who have the opportunities, not the people in the room, what is their attitude toward marketing? Because in my personal practice, I see a catastrophic level of delusion in terms of digital marketing. People think it's 5 years ago and it's not. They think they can advertise for free and they can't. So are you seeing a similar mindset? Like why is that marketing issue the way that it is?
I wish I had a good answer. The question basically is why aren't more small business owners aware of these opportunities? And a couple of reasons. Many of the people that created these platforms, they're basically two groups. One is people that are leaving Wall Street, leaving traditional finance, and that's where they've received their training. They're broker-dealers, they're from New York. They don't really think outside that bubble, and they sort of think if you create a good financial vehicle, somehow the money will magically show up, and a lot of them are struggling in their own platform economies. The other subset are people that are actually really good at internet marketing, but they don't understand finance. So you sort of have these two sides of the equation. So I think that the real problem for me is I want Ford Foundation, I want Kresge, I want MasterCard Foundation, I want the large foundations to pay for some training programs to bring this awareness to these communities. I don't think it's going to happen organically, because these platforms, not Uber, not Lyft, not Square, but there's hundreds of these small fencer platforms. They typically don't have big budgets, so they don't really have the ability to mobilize their own resources to train everyone how to use their tools. So I think that's a gap in the foundation that philanthropic space has to fill.
Yeah, I think, and again, I don't know if it's completely representative. What we've noticed and observed is that most of the advice investing comes from the group that people are, the peer group. And so I think, how did you do it? How do we get access to it? It's somehow getting that into that group where there's trust issues and there's sort of all of the kind of dynamics that go with that. I think is going to be really important. It's not just, I think, digital marketing, but it's how to become ingrained in sort of the trust network when people are thinking about it.
Just quickly, there's an analytics issue too relating to customer acquisition costs versus lifetime value generated from a customer that joins a platform. And that will change over time, but there needs to be larger organizations, foundations, investing in reaching audiences that otherwise might not be aware. I totally agree.
We should start our own platform and just focus it on that.
I mean, absolutely. To the extent that those resources are out there and they're just not reaching, right? How do you connect the dots in a way as opposed to going and trying to create something new?
Yeah.
If it's already out there. Yeah. Question here?
I enjoyed the discussion. Thank you. I enjoyed your discussion. My question is about peer lending. How does one get started with that? Do you have any websites that you recommend for research?
Yeah, my mic's working here. Sorry, mic challenges. Thank you for the question. So personally, we put our money in Prosper and Lending Club, which are the two largest. And there's a tool called Lending Robot, which is basically an AI that samples all the loans, and you can give them your risk portfolio, your risk tolerances, and what you want to do. It just searches through the universe of loans and basically picks for you. And when we started using this tool, again, I'm just talking personal experience, not endorsing anything. I don't own any of these companies, but just what we do is we saw 250 basis points increase, so 2.5% increase in our yield using this AI. So they picked a lot better than my wife and I. AI is smarter than the two of us. There's hundreds of newsletters, and Peter Renton is probably the analyst thought leader who's done the most work around explaining how these work. So if you just Google the name Peter Renton, R-E-N-T-O-N, and he runs the Lend It conference, and he has some various and sundry websites, but he's incredibly intelligent and incredibly honest, and he's not trying to sell you anything. So I'll start there. And you can also do the same thing in real estate. There's a company called Ground Floor where you can literally invest as little as $100 into people's real estate. So there's also opportunities to diversify into pure real estate lending and pure real estate debt. And I'm happy to talk to you later. There's literally hundreds of platforms out there. And then there's a website called Crowdfund Insider, which is basically just an industry newsletter about what's happening. And it's free, and there's no subscription charge, and they have tons of information on that website as well.
Question right here.
Yes, thank you. And first, very quickly for Richard, Rodney's last name again, the one here in Atlanta?
Sampson, Rodney Sampson, Tech Square Labs here in Atlanta.
Okay, S-A-M-S-O-N, is that?
Sampson,
with a
like
P,
S-A-M-P-S-O-N.
Okay.
He's here, by the way. He's at this conference.
Well, my organization is working with a number of others, many of them here in this room too, to help connect residents in Southwest Atlanta, which is a very largely unbanked part of the city, and you're never going to get a bricks and mortar bank in there, working to connect them to the financial mainstream. And so advice in terms of introducing them to fintech and ways to do that in a way along with financial literacy to, again, working towards ultimately closing the racial wealth gap begins by helping people have a basic not using check cashing services, not using products that charge very high overdraft fees, for example, that really help them be successful. What would your recommendation be?
It's complicated. I mean, and I don't work on the financial literacy side as much as the other panelists do, so I'm probably not as helpful on the very beginning stages. But one thing that I oftentimes help people understand, a lot of these fintech products can be used at an incredibly low cost of entry, $25, $50 to set up an account. And there's a perception that fintech is eating bank revenue, but what I've observed, and my boss at the university is the world's leading anthropologist of money, which is a real thing, so they sort of help people conceptualize money. And what we found is that a lot of these fintech tools are actually learning instruments where people use fintech technology as a way of understanding how finance works. And then as they mature in their understanding and mature in their wealth, they then adopt more traditional financial vehicles. So I think it's really okay to use Robinhood or Acorns or these other sites that use a very small denomination, either for investing or savings, and not to think of them as challenging traditional banking, but thinking of them as a learning tool to allow people to understand and observe. And they have great user interfaces and good design, and they're sort of fun to play with. And I think it's especially for the younger people, I think the fact that these apps are so, basically they're pleasurable to use. They're fun, they're great design, they're visually arresting. So I don't know if any of them actually allow you to create dummy accounts, and if somebody doesn't, they should. But that would allow people to sort of understand how they can manage money. There may be some really good financial literacy apps. I'm not familiar. Do you know any, Chuck?
I think our product's a pretty good one as a starting point, not to run a commercial. But I do think there's more and more. There's we try to provide an on-ramp for people who want to get into the financial system who've been left behind. In our strategy is to provide choice, to provide an alternative, not to trick or deceive, but it's like, hey, there's choices for you out there. And guess what? They're as good as the mainstream banking choices. And at the end of the day, if you choose a bank over, that's your prerogative. We congratulate that and celebrate that. So, anyway.
Yeah. Do we have time for 2 more? Okay, right here.
Good morning. My name is Corinne, and I find myself very conflicted about this panel. I love the information, but I'm conflicted personally and professionally because the information, it triggers a lot of things that decisions that I made personally, especially around home ownership, which is one of the reasons why I guess I wanted to hear from the panel around additional thoughts around home ownership. Especially, I work in the Mechanicsville area, which is south of I-20. So home ownership, I know oftentimes will contribute to the community, whether it's taxes going to schools and other community development. So if the thought is not to invest into, buying a home, but for those communities where those taxes could benefit schools, I just wanted to get your thoughts around how do you support schools without owning homes?
It's a good question. I mean, I'll let the panel turn to it, but I think your point hits on something that's really important, right? Especially when you think about home ownership. Home ownership as a wealth building or an asset building tool is one thing, but a home also provides other things, right? It provides stability for an individual family. It provides stability for an overall neighborhood. So I think we're talking about it mainly from the standpoint of if we're thinking about kind of using it as an asset building tool, does it still hold out, right? Especially coming out of the recession from what we've seen. But to your point, certainly having stable neighborhoods, the things that it can contribute to overall social conditions, I think, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up because it's easy to think about things solely in economic terms when in actuality there's a lot more that owning a home in a vibrant neighborhood can bring to a community. So I don't know if the panel has other thoughts.
I think that's a great point. As it relates to like a community perspective, owning a home, having buy-in to an actual place, leads to kind of people wanting to contribute to a community. I think that's very true. As an asset class, it can be challenging to own a home, but if it's contributing to community from a tax perspective, there is an advantage there. And I think one needs to understand the cost and benefit of home ownership. It's an equation.
Yeah, I mean, taxes are still being paid on the home, right? I think it's
Right, good
where do you
point.
want to tie your capital up in 20% of your net worth into a home, and it's a financial decision ultimately that you make.
I think we got time for one more. We'll take a question.
As a job developer and provider, I have a unique opportunity. Most people don't know about the water industry. It has a retirement rate in the next 5 years inside the city of Atlanta of 50%. Across the country, it's 55% in the next 3 years. It only requires a GED, a high school diploma, and a trade, a specialty trade, and most jobs start at $37,000. So as I develop this program, what I am running into, and I'm asking you specifically, as I start to deal with the recidivism and dealing with prison programs and creating these economic opportunities, is removing the instant gratification of the financial hustle that comes with the choices that are made. Because it requires a long-term investment, what I'm asking them to do. Requires a long-term investment, and while they can see it, they can't eat right then. So, in your experience, as a person who's providing these opportunities and these jobs and creating this program from the ground up right now, what do I do to impact that choice to get them to the end goal of long-term investment? Because this is about short-term versus long-term investment is how I look at it financially.
2 points. Thank you for asking the question. I think you bring up a very important point. First is shifting the mindset to saving. Getting people into the mindset that saving is the way to go. And leading into that, very simple incentive programs. Rewarding small wins is essential to success. That's what we found, was very retentive in terms of a practice. It got people to kind of shift into a mindset. Also, building self-confidence, knowing that they can generate wealth. It starts with one foot in front of the other, literally one foot in front of the other. I can't emphasize enough how important the small wins are, and rewarding those small wins is really key, whether it involves being complimentary, awards, or small incentives. Within the prison system, things like like I said, packets of noodles, those go a long way. Those are, that is tangibly important and impactful for people. But there's all sorts of other types of incentives that you can create. Matching is really is effective. Within the prison system, matching, people, at least I can only speak for California, but when people have their jobs and they work, they earn, max $200 a month, much of which they have to give both to the victims of their crimes and also to the government, the CDCR. So they don't end up with a lot. So $5, $10 matching that is not insignificant. It actually is significant. And in ways that kind of trains people in terms of mindset to acclimating to the real world when it comes to building up for retirement, having matching opportunities, whether it's in the trade that they work or investing in a savings account, things like that. So, incentivizing the small wins is key.
I mean, that question too, I think connects to something we were talking about earlier. These types of opportunities that are available, do people see them? How do we connect the dots? I'm in the work that you're doing. I mean, that is that job prospect for many people would be a godsend. And so when those are available, not only do the work that you're doing and others in this room, I'm sure, to connect the dots and bring people in them, but then how do you present those opportunities in ways where you're acknowledging the fact that there is a very real choice that people may be making and a very real perception, particularly in that short and long term. I think a real as we continue on in the day and move toward the Idea Labs, I think a really interesting thing to wrestle with when you're connecting the dots, how to do it best to help people actually take up the opportunities that might be available. But I believe we are out of time. So please help me in thanking my panel, Zach, Richard, and Chuck. And thank you to all of you for asking great questions and being such a great audience. So we will release you. I think lunch is at 11:30, so thanks again.
Look.
11:45, sorry. You'll be in line early.